Do you guys ever wonder how you'll be able to make $50,000 in a span of 7 to 9 months? Well, if you do, women, well, this is only for women because it's a surrogacy. Sorry guys, you can't do this, but you will be able to make up to $50,000 in 9 months. So to start off with the history, in 1978, the first in vitro fertilization baby was born, short for IVF. So that basically is, you can see in the picture, the woman and the man that are trying to have a baby actually donate the sperm and the egg. So the woman is in no way related to the baby at all. And in 1982, the first baby was from an egg donation was born. So it was just the woman that gave the egg for the baby to be born. And then in 1985, the emergence of gestational surrogacy came up. And it came up because many women, when they were doing the surrogacy, created an attachment with the baby. So in order to kind of prevent that from happening ever again, they created gestational surrogacy. And in that way, the woman carrying the baby is in no way related to the baby at all. In 1986 was the first illegal hurdle. So a woman that was a surrogate for a couple actually wanted to keep the baby. And back then they didn't have a lot of paperwork needed to file. So she didn't really have legal representation, and neither did the parents for them to kind of argue. But after that, in 1999, surrogacy had a huge step, and that was when a man was able to donate his sperm, and he was positive for HIV, but the baby ended up not having any diseases at all. So that was a huge step for surrogacy. And then I'm going to be talking about the process. So the process of surrogacy, at first you have to consider whether it's something good for you. So if you've already had a baby of your own and you actually enjoyed the process of being pregnant, delivery, and you have no complications at all, then you might be able to consider being a surrogate. And secondly, you have to find professionals to which you want to work with. So there's many different clinics and offices and people that you can go to, and each clinic is different within the process, so you can see which one would be right for you. The third step would be matching the parents with the surrogate. So parents could be either heterosexual, homosexual, a single mother or single father trying to have a baby of their own. And then the fourth step would be signing the contract, all legal forms stating that the person carrying the baby will not have any contact with the baby unless otherwise stated by the intended parents. And then the last step would be the medical process. So it'd be the insemination of the egg and the sperm, and then the pregnancy process. And of course, each the couple and the person carrying the baby will have their own attorney to ensure that everything will be going smoothly. So you're probably asking why I want to talk about this subject, and it's because my cousin, she's 35 years old now, but she started her surrogacy journey when she was 30, and she's done this 3 times. The first 2 were for the same couple. It was 2 guys that were wanting to have, first was a boy and then the second was a girl. So she had siblings for the same couple. And then her 3rd pregnancy was with twins. And then also my sister was actually pregnant last year with twins as well. And that was her first surrogacy, and they both went to the same clinic. So within that clinic, it was couples or people coming from China and trying to have a baby, which they couldn't on their own. And fun fact, when they were both delivering their twins, they didn't have to have a C-section, so they both delivered naturally. And within all the process, you do come up with obstacles and many different things that come in your way that you eventually have to deal with because you're already going through the process. So there are pros and cons. The pros is obviously you're going to be providing a baby for a couple that may not be able to be fertile themselves, or just a single parent that's not able to have someone else help them out. For the cons, you would have to take a lot of medications beforehand, such as like vitamins or prenatal pills. In the case of my sister, she has low anemia, so she had to take a lot of iron pills. And you do have to visit the doctor regularly to take blood out for any tests that you may need to take. You have to go, I think it's every 2 weeks, to check up and make sure everything's doing okay. And for the con, some people might take pregnancy differently than others. You might be emotionally and physically unprepared, so that's what you have to think about before the process in doing so. Some cons, maybe you could say, it'd be like cravings, clothing that you have to buy, hospital visits, the drawing of blood, and IVs. And of course, with the whole process, you will be getting compensation. So for the first, your first surrogacy journey, you will be able to make up to $30,000 for that process. And before they consider you for that, you do have to be, well, the regular age is 21, and you do have to have a child of your own as well. And then if you're having twins or more, triplets or 4, you get $5,000 each per baby. So you could be making up to $40,000 for twins on your first surrogacy pregnancy. And they do give you $1,000 for cycling fees, and those cycling fees are what you pay in the beginning to be able to check you out, make sure your body's doing okay, and that you're right for being a surrogate. And then apart from getting the $30,000, you do get $250 a month for anything that you may need, as in clothing, healthy food, things like that. And then you do get $1,000 in maternity clothing allowance. So for the future, the surrogacy process will be gradually changing in many different ways in order to make the process a bit more effective, easier on people that are trying to have a baby. More clinics and more states will adopt the gestational policy that will both protect the surrogate and the parents. And they, in the future, from a website called NV Surrogacy, they actually state that they will be able to prepare extra embryos for use in future cycles. So they'd be able to store them, test them as well to make sure that everything's normal in order to inseminate a surrogate in the future. So.
So Hannah, what did you think?
I thought she had a really good attention device with good question, and her explanation of the terms were really good, and I thought the topic was interesting, so it wasn't so boring, because it's something most people don't really know a lot about in general. And I thought the slides had good organization. It was past, present, and future, the order she went in. And the personal experience to the topic was really nice, because it was cool to see why she picked the topic, because most of us didn't really explain why we did. The only thing I could say is maybe to add a conclusion in the end, instead of just saying she was done, she could have overall said everything about the surrogacy and, yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think a summary at the end would be helpful. I would agree with that. The topic's clear from early on, and the attention device is okay. It's mostly focusing on the financial compensation issue, which is perfectly fine. I'm not exactly sure that it's the most compelling reason to be talking about that, but I did like a little bit of suspense that you had at the beginning. I thought that was good. I know what your topic is right away. I'm not exactly sure what your purpose is. It's all over the place on this particular subject, and I didn't really hear a preview in the presentation either. Now, I could pick out distinct sections of the speech, mostly assisted by the slides that you had that help make the transitions. And sometimes you've got some pretty direct statements about those things, but there's no setup or roadmap at the beginning of the speech, so I think that makes it a little bit problematic. You do talk about some historical information about surrogacy. There are several questions that pop into my head immediately. For instance, how often is this practiced? How many children are born every year to surrogate parents? That kind of thing. And there are a couple of places where you make it sound like it's all standardized and set in stone. I mean, when you've got that one slide that's talking about the compensation, for instance, you say they give you this, they give you that, and I'm going, well, who's they? How has that been arranged? How has that been decided? I assume that that's one of those things that gets decided in that process that you described earlier, but there's not really much connection to that particular point. And I would assume, for instance, that a lot of these things are negotiable as opposed to this is the standard fee. If this is the rate card that you get when you go to the surrogacy clinic and say, hey, I'm interested in being a surrogate, and they give you a rate card and say, okay, well, this is what you can expect to be compensated for. I go, oh, well, let me see if I can find a better price someplace else. I don't know if you go on eBay or Craigslist and find yourself a surrogate situation where they're willing to pay you more. You mentioned the one piece of legislation that kind of codifies this a little bit. I think we need to have a little bit more information about what it is that the rules are and how these things are practiced. There may be some variation, for instance, between how it is regulated in various states or jurisdictions. The visual material, I think, is okay. The pictures help kind of bring in some interest, some natural interest. I think the pictures of your cousin and the process that she's going through or went through was interesting. I think that helps quite a bit. I like the way you kind of personalize it, and you mentioned your sister's doing the same kind of thing. It's easy to follow. There's a lot of information on the one slide where you're talking about the process. There's something in the upper corner that you actually talk about, and then there's stuff in the rest of it that doesn't really seem to come up, although I think it is connected to what's being talked about there. I think you need to either explain that a little bit more or cut down on and edit the visual image so we're not getting data that's not really the focus of what you're talking about at that particular moment. I think you do a pretty good job delivering the speech to us. Sometimes you do start turning to the screen to kind of address what's going on up there. It's natural. It's one of those things that people do because they're looking up there to remind themselves of what it is that they're talking about, and then they just start thinking about that subject, and it's a little bit easier to focus on the picture than it is on the audience. Like Hannah said, I think it also needs a concluding section. That felt really abrupt. I didn't think that there were very smooth transitions between the points. They often felt very sharp. The organizational structure, some of it is chronological, most of it is topical. So you start with the history and describe the process, but then we're also talking about why I'm talking about this and the pros and cons, and then the future. I'm going, okay, so we kind of went from one organizational method to another one, and that's okay as long as it's relatively clear. But it did feel like we were just kind of, well, boom, here's another category, here's another category, here's another category, and it just feels a little bit like those are sort of random, and that's another reason why you need to have a clearer purpose statement at the beginning of the speech. And then your concluding statement is much like the tagline, yours is simply so. And that's a little awkward. All right, thank you.